Welcome to another video by your friend Matthew Sherling. I've been reading some interesting books this year, and one of them that I finished recently was the Essential William James. Such a interesting figure, people call him the grandfather of American psychology. He was writing in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and he wrote a really famous psychology textbook that, if I understand correctly, is still sometimes used today. And I haven't read that, to be honest, but I've read the Varieties of Religious Experience. I think that's the first thing I ever read from him a long time ago. And I've read little bits and pieces and some essays online, and then I got this year, and I absolutely loved it. He's got, there are like essays and chapters. Here are some of the titles. He's got one called What is an Emotion? Really cool. He's got one called The Stream of Consciousness. One called Does Consciousness Exist? He's got one called The Will to Believe. And a few on pragmatism. I really like his ideas on pragmatism. And so I wanted to just go through and read some of my favorite passages from this book. If you haven't checked out William James, then you totally should. Here's one passage. It says, "My thesis, on the contrary, is that the bodily changes follow directly the perception of the exciting fact, and that our feeling of the same changes as they occur is the emotion. Common sense says we lose our fortune, are sorry and weep. We meet a bear, are frightened and run. We are insulted by a rival, are angry and strike. The hypothesis here to be defended says that this order of sequence is incorrect, that the one mental state is not immediately induced by the other, that the bodily manifestations must first be interposed between, and that the more rational statement is that we feel sorry because we cry, angry because we strike, afraid because we tremble, and not that we cry, strike, or tremble because we are sorry, angry, or fearful, as the case may be. Without the bodily states following on the perception, the latter would be purely cognitive in form, pale, colorless, destitute of emotional warmth." Interesting, Mr. William. He says, "To consciousness, as such, nothing can happen, for timeless itself, it is only a witness of happenings in time in which it plays no part. It is, in a word, but the logical correlative of content in an experience, of which the peculiarity is that fact comes to light in it, that awareness of content takes place. Consciousness as such is entirely impersonal. Self in its activities belong to the content. To say that I am self-conscious or conscious of putting forth volition means only that certain contents for which self and effort of will are the names are not without witness as they occur." Fascinating. Definitely some parallels with old Indian ideas from Advaita Vedanta and certain Buddhist ideas for sure. And of course he was friends with Swami Vivekananda. He was also friends with the French philosopher Henry Bergson. And okay. Let's keep going. Let's keep on going. Forgive me. "The instant field of the present is at all times what I call the pure experience. It is only virtually or potentially either object or subject as yet. For the time being, it is plain, unqualified actuality or existence, a simple that. In this immediacy, it is of course valid. It is there. We act upon it. And the doubling of it in retrospection into a state of mind and a reality intended thereby is just one of the acts. The state of mind first treated explicitly as such in retrospection will stand corrected or confirmed, and the retrospective experience in its turn will get a similar treatment, but the immediate experience in its passing is always truth, practical truth, something to act on, at its own movement. If the world were then and there to go out like a candle, it would remain truth absolute and objective, for it would be the last word, would have no critic, and no one would ever oppose the thought in it to the reality intended. The peculiarity of our experiences that they not only are, but are known, which their conscious quality is invoked to explain, is better explained by their relations, these relations themselves being experiences to one another. Yeah. So he has a lot of ideas about like pure experience being this kind of raw, unmediated encounter, basically, that precedes anything that we put on top of it, and that also can be seen in a lot of different spiritual traditions. But yeah, he definitely highlights that a lot, and he also highlights the process of that raw, unmediated encounter entering into thoughts and concepts, and he explores the whole territory. And obviously consciousness is a hot topic right now, as it should be, and he's got a lot to say about it, and I'm always kind of fascinated by what people who talk or write about consciousness, what do they have to say about it? It's still a mysterious subject, despite the fact that it is the very thing that it's the very thing that makes thought possible, you could argue. It's the very thing that makes language possible. And yet, it's hard to look at it because it is the most obvious fact, and yet kind of the most mysterious, right? Okay, so he says, my reply to this is my last word, and I greatly grieve that to many it will sound materialistic. I cannot help that, however, for I too have my intuitions, and I must obey them. Let the case be what it may in others, I am as confident as I am of anything that in myself the stream of thinking, which I recognize emphatically as a phenomenon, is only a careless name for what, when scrutinized, reveals itself to consist chiefly of the stream of my breathing. The I think, which Kant said must be able to accompany all my objects, is the I breathe, which actually does accompany them. There are other internal facts besides breathing, and these increase the assets of consciousness, so far as the latter is subject to immediate perception. But breath, which was ever the original of spirit, breath moving outwards between the glottis and the nostrils, is, I am persuaded, the essence out of which philosophers have constructed the entity known to them as consciousness. That entity is fictitious, while thoughts in the concrete are fully real. But thoughts in the concrete are made of the same stuff as things are. Well, as you can see, I'm getting a little blinded here, but I feel blessed by the sunlight. And as you can see from that passage, wow. Really interesting statement about replacing the I think that Kant talked about as I breathe, and putting breath as the most fundamental aspect of our being or something, which, obviously in literal ways that makes sense. And again, arguably the most universal and ancient meditation practices revolve around the breath. Let's keep going, shall we? According to my view, experience as a whole is a process in time, whereby innumerable particular terms lapse and are superseded by others that follow upon them by transitions which, whether disjunctive or conjunctive in content, are themselves experiences and must in general be accounted at least as real as the terms which they relate. I love this emphasis on relations and the lapses and the transitions being experiences themselves, right? What the nature of the event called superseding signifies depends altogether on the kind of transition that obtains. Some experiences simply abolish their predecessors without continuing them in any way. Others are felt to increase or to enlarge their meaning, to carry out their purpose, or to bring us nearer to their goal. They represent them and may fulfill their function better than they fulfilled it themselves. But to fulfill a function in a world of pure experience can be conceived and defined only in one possible way. In such a world, transitions and arrivals are the only events that happen, though they happen by so many sorts of path. The only function that one experience can perform is to lead into another experience, and the only fulfillment we can speak of is the reaching of a certain experienced end. When one experience leads to the same end as another, they agree in function, but the whole system of experiences as they are immediately given presents itself as a quasi-chaos through which one can pass out of an initial term in many directions and yet end in the same terminus, moving from next to next by a great many alternative paths. To be conscious means not simply to be, but to be reported, known, to have awareness of one's being added to that being. And this is just what happens when the appropriative experience supervenes. The pen experience, in its original immediacy, is not aware of itself, but simply is. And the second experience is required for what we call awareness of it to occur. The difficulty of understanding what happens here is therefore not a logical difficulty. There is no contradiction involved. It is an ontological difficulty, rather. Experiences come on an enormous scale, and if we take them all together, they come in a chaos of incommensurable relations that we cannot straighten out. We have to abstract different groups of them and handle these separately if we are to talk of them at all. Wowzer. Good job, Mr. W. James. An honest and thorough and open thinker. A moral question is a question not of what sensibly exists, but of what is good, or would be good if it did exist. Science can tell us what exists, but to compare the worths both of what exists and of what does not exist, we must consult not science, but what Pascal calls our heart. Science herself consults her heart when she lays it down that the infinite ascertainment of fact and correction of false belief are the supreme goods for man. Challenge the statement, and science can only repeat it oracularly, or else prove it by showing that such ascertainment and correction bring man all sorts of other goods, which man's heart in turn declares. The question of having moral beliefs at all or not having them is decided by our will. Are our moral preferences true or false, or are they only odd biological phenomena, making things good or bad for us, but in themselves indifferent? How can your pure intellect decide? If your heart does not want a world of moral reality, your head will assuredly never make you believe in one. Wow. The more perfect and more eternal aspect of the universe is represented in our religions as having personal form. The universe is no longer a mere it to us, but a thou, if we are religious, and any relation that may be possible from person to person might be possible here. For instance, although in one sense we are passive portions of the universe, in another we show a curious autonomy, as if we were small active centers on our own account. We feel too as if the appeal of religion to us were made to our own active goodwill, as if evidence might be forever withheld from us unless we met the hypothesis halfway. To take a trivial illustration, just as a man who in a company of gentlemen made no advances, asked a warrant for every concession, and believed no one's word without proof, would cut himself off by such churlishness from all the social rewards that a more trusting spirit would earn, so here, one who should shut himself up in snarling logicality and try to make the gods extort his recognition willy-nilly, or not get it at all, might cut himself off forever from his only opportunity of making the gods' acquaintance. This feeling, forced on us, we know not whence, that by obstinately believing that there are gods, we are doing the universe the deepest service we can, seems part of the living essence of the religious hypothesis. If the hypothesis were true in all its parts, including this one, then pure intellectualism, with its veto on our making willing advances, would be an absurdity, and some participation of our sympathetic nature would be logically required. I, therefore, for one, cannot see my way to accepting the agnostic rules for truth-seeking, or willfully agree to keep my willing nature out of the game. I cannot do so for this plain reason, that a rule of thinking which would absolutely prevent me from acknowledging certain kinds of truth, if those kinds of truth were really there, would be an irrational rule. That for me is the long and short of the formal logic of the situation, no matter what the kinds of truth might materially be. Right on, buddy. Metaphysics has usually followed a very primitive kind of quest. You know how men have always hankered after unlawful magic, and you know what a great part in magic words have always played. If you have his name or the formula of incantation that binds him, you can control the spirit, genie, or whatever the power may be. Solomon knew the names of all the spirits, and having their names, he held them subject to his will. So the universe has always appeared to the natural mind as a kind of enigma, of which the key must be sought in the shape of some illuminating or power-bringing word or name. That word names the universe's principle, and to possess it is, after a fashion, to possess the universe itself. God, matter, reason, the absolute, energy are so many solving names. You can rest when you have them. You are at the end of your metaphysical quest. But if you follow the pragmatic method, you cannot look on any such word as closing your quest. You must bring out of each word its practical cash value. Set it at work within the stream of your experience. It appears less as a solution than as a program for more work, and more particularly as an indication of the ways in which existing realities may be changed. Theories thus become instruments, not answers to enigmas, in which we can rest. Pragmatism, practicality, the truth is what is useful. The truth in something is revealed by the impact that it has. That's the pragmatist perspective. Any idea upon which we can ride, so to speak, any idea that will carry us prosperously from any one part of our experience to any other part, linking things satisfactorily, working securely, simplifying, saving labor, is true for just so much, true and so far forth, true instrumentally. This is the instrumental view of truth taught so successfully at Chicago. The view that truth in our ideas means their power to work. Right on. I'm almost done. Don't worry. Hopefully this has been enjoyable to you. If you like any of this, check out Mr. William James. A good man, good human being, good person, good soul. The first of the two problems is that our powers, the second, that of our means. We sought somehow to get a topographic survey made of the limits of human power in every conceivable direction, something like a chart of the limits of the human field of vision. And we ought then to construct a methodical inventory of the paths of access or keys, differing with the diverse types of individual to the different kinds of power. This would be an absolutely concrete study to be carried on by using historical and biographical material mainly. The limits of power must be limits that have been realized in actual persons, and the various ways of unlocking the reserves of power must have been exemplified in individual lives. Laboratory experimentation can play but a small part. Your psychologists outside of hypnosis can never be called on to tax his energies in ways as extreme as those which the emergencies of life will force on him. So yeah, he's talking about having this very systematized study of the experience, transcendent experiences, mystical experiences, religious experiences, which he himself tried to do in his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, which began as a series of lectures that he gave in the early 1900s. Maybe the late 1890s, as far as those lectures go. I think it was the early 1900s. Forgive me if I'm wrong, Let's see. This is the last passage I'm going to read. This thoroughly pragmatic view of religion has usually been taken as a matter of course by common men. They have interpolated divine miracles into the field of nature. They have built a heaven out beyond the grave. It is only transcendentalist metaphysicians who think that, without adding any concrete details to nature or subtracting any, but by simply calling it the expression of absolute spirit, you make it more divine just as it stands. I believe the pragmatic way of taking religion to be the deeper way. It gives it body as well as soul. It makes it claim, as everything real must claim, some characteristic realm of fact as its very own. What the more characteristically divine facts are, apart from the actual inflow of energy in the faith state and the prayer state, I know not. But the over-belief on which I am ready to make my personal venture is that they exist. The whole drift of my education goes to persuade me that the world of our present consciousness is only one out of many worlds of consciousness that exist, and that those other worlds must contain experiences which have a meaning for our life also, and that although in the main their experiences and those of this world keep discrete, yet the two become continuous at certain points, and higher energies filter in. By being faithful in my poor measure to this over-belief, I seem to myself to keep more sane and true. I can, of course, put myself into the sectarian scientist attitude and imagine vividly that the world of sensations and of scientific laws and objects might be all. But whenever I do this, I hear that inward monitor of which W.K. Clifford once wrote, whispering the word bosh. Humbug is humbug, even though it bear the scientific name, and the total expression of human experience, as I view it objectively, invincibly urges me beyond the narrow scientific bounds. Assuredly, the real world is of a different temperament, more intricately built than physical science allows. So my objective and my subjective conscience both hold me to the overbelief which I express. Who knows whether the faithfulness of individuals here below to their own poor overbeliefs may not actually help God, in turn, to be more effectively faithful to his own greater tasks. Until next time, peace, love, take care of yourselves, be good to yourselves, be good to others. If you feel compelled, it would probably be better if you did. Find out for yourself. Until next time, peace out.